Okay, so we're diving into some pretty murky waters today.
Murky's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You shared an episode with us from Truth Media Podcast from October 1st, 2024. And, well, it's about this report on Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness and his finances. And what sounds like it's causing quite a stir, to say the least.
Yeah, it definitely has people talking.
So this report, it's all about, what are they called again? Statutory declarations.
Exactly, yeah. Statutory declarations.
And just remind me again what those are. Like, what's the big deal? What are we looking at here?
So basically, think of them like kind of like a financial x-ray for politicians. It's a public record of all their financial dealings, assets, income, liabilities, you name it. It's all supposed to be laid out.
Okay, so everything's out in the open. But why should the average person care about this? What's the big deal if a politician's, net worth jumps up a bit?
Right. Well, that's the thing, right? These declarations, they're meant to be all about transparency and accountability, especially in a democracy like Jamaica.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be a safeguard against corruption, to reassure the public that their leaders aren't just in it for themselves.
Right, using their position to,
Exactly, to line their own pockets.
Yeah.
And that's why when these discrepancies pop up, that's when things get a little
suspicious.
Exactly, a little suspicious, yeah.
Yeah. Because this podcast episode, it really dives into some of these discrepancies in Holness's declarations. Like, for instance, there's this big jump in his net worth. Happens over a pretty short period, and there's really no clear explanation in the declarations about how that happened.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. It's that lack of transparency that really sets off alarm bells. Like, the report even mentions unexplained deposits in his bank accounts, which, okay, on its own, I mean, politicians can have investments too, right?
Sure, yeah.
But the key here is transparency. Those interests, they need to be clearly declared just to avoid any whiff of impropriety. You know how it is. We've got to keep everything above board.
It's like they say, sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Transparency is key.
But then it gets even more complicated because the report also brings up potential conflicts of interest, especially when it comes to Holness's liabilities.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. So if he owes money to people who could benefit from his policies, I mean, that creates a whole web of potentially shady connections, right?
Absolutely. It's all about who owes what to whom. He can get very murky very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's where we start to see the real potential for problems,
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up because this report actually, it dives even deeper into that whole idea of, like you said, who owes what to whom.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets even juicier, right? The report, it also digs into Holness's real estate holdings. And let me tell you, in Jamaica, land ownership, that's a whole other ballgame.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What makes real estate so sensitive over there?
Well, think about it. Jamaica's history. It's got this, complex past with colonialism and inequality, right? So land, it represents a lot more than just like property value,
Yeah.
Any whiff of, let's say, impropriety when it comes to real estate, man, that raises eyebrows. People want to know, is it fair? Is it transparent? Is someone in power using their position to,
to get ahead, basically.
Exactly, to get ahead in the game.
So how does Holness fit into all of this with his own real estate?
Well, that's the thing. The report, it uncovers these discrepancies in how he reported some of his properties.
Oh, boy.
Some of them, they seem to be valued way lower than they probably should be. And get this, some are just, poof, gone. Missing entirely from certain years' declarations. Like, where'd they go?
So it's not just like, oh, he was a little off on the paperwork. This sounds like a pretty big deal.
Exactly. And you start to think, okay, if you're undervaluing your properties, what's the game here? Could be trying to dodge taxes?
Yeah.
Which, in a place like Jamaica, that's a big no-no. People are struggling. Every dollar counts for the government,
Yeah.
So it creates this perception of, well, you're not playing by the rules. Especially when you're the one making the rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely not a good look.
Not a good look at all.
So I've got potential conflicts of interest, these shady real estate dealings. I mean, where does it end?
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about wholeness anymore. You know, this whole thing, it starts to make you wonder about the whole system in Jamaica. Like, how effective are these checks and balances, really?
Yeah, you shared that Truth Media podcast with us, and they even said something similar, right? Like, this goes beyond just one politician.
100%. Because if a prime minister can, let's say, get creative with their financial disclosures, and there's no real consequence, man, what message does that send?
Take one rule for them.
Exactly. One rule for them and another for everyone else. And that's a dangerous road to go down for any country, but especially one facing the kind of challenges Jamaica is.
Definitely. So what happens now? What can Jamaica do to regain that public trust?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? The podcast you shared, they actually brought up an interesting idea. They were talking about setting up an independent body, the whole separate entity, with no ties to the government, to audit these declarations, to really get in there and make sure everything is on the up and up.
Okay, so like a truly independent watchdog kind of.
Exactly. You need someone who can say, hold on a second, what's going on here?
Oh.
Without fear of, stepping on anyone's toes. That's what real accountability looks like. And who knows, maybe that's what it takes to get Jamaica back on track. Only time will tell, I guess.
It's kind of disheartening when you think about it. Like, if this is how things really are, what does that tell the people of Jamaica about their leaders?
Yeah, it's, it can really make people lose faith. And when it seems like the people in charge aren't playing by the same rules, it makes you wonder, what's the point?
Exactly. And then people just check out.
Exactly. They disengage. They get cynical. It's like, why bother voting? Why bother speaking out if nothing ever changes, right?
Right. So is there any way to, I don't know, turn the ship around? The podcast, they mentioned this idea of setting up like an independent body to keep things in check, did they not?
They did, yeah. An independent auditing body. It's an idea, that's for sure.
Did that even work, though?
Well, it could. If it's truly independent, if it's free from any political meddling, then you could have something there.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just for show, right?
Exactly. You need people with, real backbone, real integrity to run a thing like that. People who aren't afraid to speak truth to power.
People who aren't afraid to say, like, hey, hold on a minute, this doesn't look right.
Precisely. That's the whole point. Someone needs to be able to hold these politicians accountable. And if it can't be the system itself, then maybe it needs to be someone looking in from the outside.
It's a lot to think about. It seems like there's a lot at stake here. This deep dive into Holness's finances, I guess you could call it, it's definitely raised a lot of questions. We don't know for sure if there's been any actual wrongdoing, but it makes you wonder, about the importance of transparency, of accountability, of making sure that everyone plays by the same rules, not just in Jamaica, but everywhere. It's something for all of us to think about.